Lawbreeze and Gentlegrams, the auto-tune originator, Aubrey's original archetype, T-Pain, properly punctured a petty prom queen to heat veins. Boil the blood of the baffled bearded BBL buffoon. T-Pain suggested that La Brianna read the room and leave the room. Retire. Put down the mic and every future desire or plans to aspire acquiring compliments from the culture. T-Pain kicked Lawbreeze back in like acupuncture. So let's judge this juncture of the comical Canadian cluster, but first, smash that like and subscribe button like lightning and thunder. Now, Lawbreeze and Gentlegrams, Drake is mad, alright? Drake is mad. If I had a nickel for every time Drake got mad, I'd be richer than Drake. And this time, the target is none other than T-Pain, my favorite artist of the 5th grade, and a man who really paved the way, and I cannot emphasize that enough, really paved the way for La Brianna, the Marilyn Monroe VHO. When you first heard this rapper from Canada who was incorporating these moody sung melodies, R&B infused with hip-hop, blending both genres, which is now a norm in hip-hop, Drake gets credited as the one who took that to the next level, who set a standard in hip-hop where if you wanted to be competing with the titans of the mainstream, you had to know how to sing your hooks. You had to incorporate melody in some capacity. And who does Drake credit adopting that style to? Well, none other than T-Pain.
There's people who inspired me. Obviously, 50 Cent, 21 Questions will probably be my most inspiring example of a guy who's not supposed to be singing. Obviously, you had, T-Pain and Wayne doing their style of things, which was huge. Another major example was 808s, basically a singing album inspired by like genres in music that maybe people in rap didn't even know about. I'll always give credit where credit is due, so I credit all those people with that movement.
And this was very obvious, which I believe is the root of where T-Pain's kind of coming from with a lot of his commentary. We're going to get into all of that and why T-Pain is critical of Drake, why Drake resents T-Pain's critiques. But notice what Drake said in that 2019 interview when he's asked who inspired him to incorporate melody and singing and R&B into his hip-hop records. He said the first time he heard that and the light bulb went off in his head was when he heard 50 Cent singing on the song 21 Questions. Then, of course, being around Lil Wayne and the Young Money camp in 2008, the peak of Wayne's career and T-Pain's career, he saw both of them fuse auto-tune, R&B, crooning, hip-hop sounds, creating hit after hit. But the album that really finally molded Drake was 808s and Heartbreak by Kanye West. T-Pain was pivotal in the creation of that 808s and Heartbreak album. T-Pain himself said, 808s and Heartbreak was a direct copy of my debut album, Rapper Turned Singer. I'm not just being a D by saying that it sounds a lot like my album. Literally, Kanye told me that he listened to Rapper Turned Singer and he made 808s and Heartbreak. And I mean, look at the album title itself, Rapper Turned Singer. T-Pain not only played a pivotal role in shaping the soundscape that allowed a young Drake to flourish, but he also played a major hand in creating the album 808s and Heartbreak that inspired Drake to do what he does. And I bring that up simply as an important reminder that no matter how much Drake wants to shape the narrative in 2025 that T-Pain is just bitter and has resented him his entire career, there would be no Drake without the sound that T-Pain created. So don't be fooled by the Instagram cyberbullying, because Drake even bullies Joe Budden on Instagram, calling him a failed rapper, but has failed to acknowledge the fact that Joe Budden played a key role in how Drake rapped early on before he even got inspired by T-Pain to start singing.
I used to rap like Budden back in the day, just with the way I used to try and get like certain flows off.
So yeah, idols become rivals, right? Way back in the day, Drake even used to say that he loved Pusha T in the clips so much that he went on eBay and bought a Pusha T microphone with Pusha T's signature on it, right? He said Kanye was his greatest inspiration. Pharrell was a huge inspiration. He took the blueprint Joe Budden laid down. He took the style and sound of T-Pain. And now in 2025, he's beefing them all. So who sprinkled the spiciness into Lawbreeze's Hello Kitty nail polish that prompted him to take his Twitter fingers to Instagram today and type up, T-Pain has always had resentment for me. You can hear it every time he speaks on my name. So Lawbreeze and Gentlegrams, let's take it all the way back and uncover why Drake hates T-Pain.
I study rap battles for a living.
Now, Lawbreeze and Gentlegrams, I study rap battles for a living, alright? And in order to truly study rap battles for a living inside and out, you gotta get to the root of the problem. So we're gonna take it all the way back here to 2008, a magical time period where T-Pain was on every other song that you heard on the radio, whether it was his own song, a hook that he was featured on. If you owned a car and that car had a radio station and you existed in 2008, your car ride would consist of a sensational summation of auto-tune serenading by none other than T-Pain.
Here are the nominees for Best Collaboration.
Chris Brown featuring T-Pain, Flo Rida featuring T-Pain, DJ Khaled featuring T-Pain, Kanye West featuring T-Pain, T-Pain featuring T-Pain.
And the winner is T-Pain. Let's go.
And this was really the guy who, of course, didn't invent autotune, but invented the idea of augmenting your vocals through this tool, which would give you the ability to tackle every genre and incorporate melody into every hip-hop song. So as you can see, Drake didn't just necessarily take T-Pain's blueprint of singing in his hip-hop music. He didn't just take the idea of incorporating auto-tune into his music like T-Pain did, but he also took T-Pain's blueprint of pumping out an insane amount of features and hits on his own to the point where he controlled the charts. Every song featuring Drake. But at first, it was every song featuring T-Pain. If you wanted auto-tune, you called T-Pain. He was the auto-tune hook master, but there was one artist that destroyed that for him before Drake, and that was actually Snoop Dogg. See, while T-Pain had hit after hit on the radio, Snoop Dogg wanted to incorporate auto-tune into one of his songs. Instead of calling T-Pain up, like the rest of the industry was doing, he decided to just use auto-tune for himself, which opened the floodgates for other artists to realize, hey, this is just a tool available to anyone. We don't actually need T-Pain here if we want to use T-Pain's tool.
I was the cheat code until Snoop did Sensible Seduction. Before that, Jamie Foxx got me on Blame It because he was using auto-tune, and he was like, I don't want to be seen as trying to take your Diddy gave me a point on Last Train to Paris because he was using auto-tune.
Just because he was using it.
Just because he was I wasn't even on there.
That's dope.
Like I said, I was the face. So anytime anybody had anything to do with auto-tune, it was me. I was involved.
Wow.
And Snoop made it clear to people, this is just available for everybody.
And this is when T-Pain ran into a problem. See, after this, everybody and their grandmother was using autotune. People were autotuning viral clips of Charlie Sheen making songs out of that. I'm sure you guys remember the song Jumping Out the Window. I think autotune was even used in a Wendy's commercial. And it got to the point where enough was enough. Rappers were singing with autotune more than they were actually rapping. So the GOAT of rap, Jay-Z, was coming out with his comeback album, Blueprint 3, in 2009. Last time we heard from Jay was 2007, when autotune was a lot less prevalent than it was when he was gearing up to drop Blueprint 3. So the first single he puts out for that project is called DOA, Death of Autotune. This was an anthem dedicated to the best rapper alive at the time, declaring that this vocal enhancement tool was a poison to the culture, to the genre. He rapped, "This is anti-auto-tune, death of the ringtones. This ain't for iTunes, this ain't for sing-alongs." And at the time, the line was blurred between whether people thought this was a diss at T-Pain or whether Jay was actually paying homage to T-Pain, because on the third verse, he starts shouting out a bunch of rappers who he feels are doing their thing at the time, rapping, "I might send this to the mixtape Weezy. This stuff needs a verse from Jeezy." And he concludes that scheme rapping, "You rappers are singing too much. Get back to rap. You're T-Paining too much." Literally using T-Pain's name as a verb to describe rappers using autotune. Again, T-Pain was the face of autotune. Now this song, while it might have been good, aged absolutely horribly and did not do close to the job it was intending to, because autotune only got bigger after this. Of course, we got Kanye's 808s and Heartbreak. We got the Ron Browns, the Roscoe Dashes. Everyone ignored Jay-Z here, except for T-Pain. T-Pain took this initially as a direct slight to everything he had built up, the movement he had built up with autotune. He crashed Jay-Z's set that summer at Summer Jam, uninvitedly jumping on the stage as Jay was performing Death of Autotune. And he was not happy when the song initially released, saying that all he saw was autotune and death. He took it as disrespect.
I was pissed off. I didn't listen to the song either, so it was just like, all I heard was auto-tune and death. It's my technique. That's what I'm known for. So when I hear death of that, wow.
You're taking it as like death of T-Pain.
Yeah,
almost.
You know what I'm saying?
Now, around this same time, T-Pain recalls how, again, he was everywhere on the radio, and back then, it wasn't the streaming era where you could just pump out song after song and things not feeling a little oversaturated. So his record label had told him, look, let's build some anticipation. You're on every other song on the radio. Why don't you take a step back, stop doing these features, make people miss you a little bit before we come back with your next project. It'll build some buzz. That was the major mistake that T-Pain made. It wasn't death of auto-tune. It wasn't crashing Jay-Z's set that summer. It wasn't too many songs about the bartender. It wasn't that rappers like Snoop Dogg realized they could just use auto-tune on their own and left T-Pain in the dust. It was that T-Pain took a step back right as another star was filling his shoes. See, around 2009, when T-Pain took his short hiatus, a young Drake had just signed to Young Money Entertainment and actually went on his first stadium tour with both T-Pain and Lil Wayne as an opener with the rest of Young Money for the He Rap, He Sang tour. That's what the T-Pain Lil Wayne show was called, because both of them rapped and singed. But you know who did that at a much larger level very shortly after? None other than La Brianna. He dropped So Far Gone, absolutely changed the game, so much so to the point where it's kind of ironic when T-Pain was attempting to apologize to Jay-Z for lashing out over the Death of Auto-Tune song. He actually did so in the form of a remix to Drake's song Successful, rapping his own apology freestyle over the song titled More Careful. But by then it was too late. If you wanted an auto-tune hook with an artist that could sing and rap, you went to Drake. If you wanted a rapper singing about vulnerabilities and relationships with bartenders and strippers, you went to Drake. Initially, T-Pain was the go-to guy to collaborate with Lil Wayne, but that shortly became Drake. And because Drake studies rap battles for a living, he knew that in order to beat his competitors, he had to outwork them. And that's exactly what Drake did with T-Pain's Blueprint. Go listen to early Drake songs like Money to Blow, I'm Still Fly, Uptown, I Get Paper. Like, if he didn't sound like Lil Wayne at the time, he sounded like T-Pain. And he filled the gap in the industry that was missing when T-Pain was on his little break. And that messed up the whole flow of things, because by the time T-Pain came back around, the sound of hip-hop had already revolved, with Drake spearheading the melody-infused rap R&B hybrid type of hip-hop. Lil Wayne was in jail. Kanye West had moved on from 808s and Heartbreak back to pure rapping with Dark Twisted Fantasy. The Ron Browns, the Roscoe Dashes, they didn't have the hit-making abilities of a Drake or a T-Pain. And look at DJ Khaled, right? His go-to guy used to be T-Pain for all the hooks, but that quickly became Drake. And T-Pain was very well aware of the tide shifting and the massive amount of influence that Drake took from him. He said on multiple occasions that he was Drake before Drake.
I'm Sprung is about falling for a bitch. You know what I'm saying? Like being that corny, falling for a bitch. I'm in love with a stripper, you falling for a bitch in the club. Like, I've always been that corny. I've always been the simp nigga. I was Drake before Drake. I was in love before niggas was really cool with being in love. I've been a real corny nigga. And I love that shit, because that means I'm not doing the same as everybody else.
And Drake again acknowledged the influence as well. I mean, aside from what we looked at earlier in the video where he literally says T-Pain's Blueprint laid the foundation for Drake having the ability to do what he does. Again, Drake was around T-Pain and Lil Wayne very early on in his career to watch them at the height of theirs. He's acknowledged this in his own music, rapping, I've been around since T-Pain was pouring us Nouveau.
I've been doing this since T-Pain was pouring us Nouveau.
So you can see here, Drake comes up right next to T-Pain, takes immense influence from him, fills the gap of a rapper, singer, killing the hooks, killing the features, hit after hit, filling that void while T-Pain was gone. And by the time he came back, sadly, everyone kind of moved on. But T-Pain was kind of going through his own thing, suffering depression, label issues. He took a step back, a graceful exit, as some might say, and that's going to play an important role very shortly. But you might think that T-Pain would harbor a little bit of resentment, right? Look at all his sons running around, the Travis Scotts, the Futures, the Drakes. These were all off the backs of the Kanye, Lil Wayne, and T-Pain blueprint. Because Kanye and Wayne remained so relevant throughout the 2010s, they often got their credit for that influence. T-Pain didn't. And I'm sad that T-Pain never had the dominance, the run that he had ever again. I'm sad that that ended. But T-Pain made the best of it. Just like he was a pioneer with autotune, he was also a pioneer with streaming. He stopped dropping albums and instead started dropping Twitch streams. He was basically Snackademiks before Snackademiks. And you know how Snackademiks gets drunk on Twitch and starts talking crap about all these rappers. And you know how Drake said that every time T-Pain speaks about him, it's with some form of resentment. Well, let's take a deeper look at T-Pain talking about Drake's career as it evolved. So initially, when T-Pain attempts to make his big comeback after his hiatus in 2011 with his album Revolver, the album kept getting delayed, and T-Pain pointed to one specific feature delaying the project. He got on Twitter and said, "I know y'all been waiting on the album, but the last thing I need is a verse from Drake, and the album is complete. So find Drake and tell him to hurry the hell up and finish the verse. Ha 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 ha." He also said, by the way, the song with Drake on it is the next single as well, and that's why I haven't dropped a new single yet. Just letting y'all know. Now, spoiler alert, we never got that Drake song. Drake wasn't featured on that album. And that was the last major label album we ever got from T-Pain. But Drake kept continuing his dominance using T-Pain's formula, and things came to a little bit of a halt in 2015 when Meek Mill called out the fact that Drake was not doing it alone. See, Drake had a team of ghostwriters concocting some of his greatest hits. Of course, this being a massive shock to the industry, T-Pain is questioned about it while he's at the BET Hip Hop Awards. Remember that Drake said every time T-Pain talks about him, it's with resentment. Tell me if you guys think this sounds like someone harboring resentment.
That's been happening for years. The only thing I think people got shooken up about is, if somebody say that they're the best and they don't say I got the best team doing this, like, I'm the collectively the best, like then it kind of gets like, oh, you lied. If you truly are the best, and just be the best and you don't really have to say anything. People already know that. It wasn't a big deal. It was just, people felt lied to and they was like, ooh, we found out something we weren't supposed to know.
I mean, essentially T-Pain's just saying, like, Drake has said he's the best, and he makes a case for being the best, in T-Pain's words. However, he never told people that he uses a little bit of a team. He's got a little bit of help, right? So it was just kind of like a big shock to everyone. But it doesn't take away from Drake being great, and he should just focus on being great. This wasn't resentment, this was solid advice. And then you get to Drake's next beef with Pusha T, where it was pretty undisputed that Drake lost that thing, right? I mean, can we all agree, even though Drake studies rap battles for a living, he lost that rap battle?
I study rap battles for a living.
But when T-Pain's asked about it, he actually gives Drake his credit here. He says, when it comes to actual songs, Drake had the better songs, Pusha T had the better bars, Drake obviously lost the battle, but T-Pain was really looking forward to hear the big bomb that Drake was holding back. Because if you guys don't remember, he basically backed out of that Pusha T beef saying, I made this diss track, it didn't feel right, so I'm deciding not to release it and to just bow out of this whole thing.
Who do you think won the Drake-Pusha T rap battle?
Both were equally great. If we're just talking about pure rap battle, Drake had better songs, Pusha T had better lyrics. If we're talking W's to L's, the Drake situation seemed a little worse than Pusha T's. Drake not putting out his last diss song, which I'd love to hear, because he said himself, I said some terrible things on there. Right. I would just like to know.
Now you want to hear it.
I mean, obviously, you can't start that kind of sentence and not let us hear that.
So I don't know, you guys tell me, does that sound resentful on T-Pain's end? No, anyways, speaking of this era, right? Drake was crafting this album Scorpion. After this beef that he backed out of, he ended up devoting side A of the album to being strictly hip-hop, where he's essentially subliminally responding to Pusha T and Kanye West. Side B of the album, which was what he was cooking up months before the Pusha T beef, was strictly R&B. And on this side, you hear a lot of T-Pain influence. Songs like Ratchet Happy Birthday, written by Party Next Door. Obviously, the title, self-explanatory. It's a happy birthday song about a ratchet girl or a ratchet time they're having on this girl's birthday. Very reminiscent to the themes T-Pain explored on his R&B records, like I'm in Love with a Stripper or Bartender, right? Opening up about his love life in this ratchet, raunchy environment, the strip club, the bar, etc. Songs like Jaded, songs like Blue Tint, even In My Feelings, all these songs kind of had glimpses of T-Pain, but at this point, like Drake said, he took massive inspiration from T-Pain, and he's now 8 years in the game. So the line between what part of the sound did T-Pain birth versus what parts of these songs is just simply Drake doing Drake, that line was kind of blurred. T-Pain, in his opinion, thought that side B, the R&B side of Scorpion, was a direct carbon copy of T-Pain's sound.
I couldn't listen to side B of Scorpion with you. Couldn't do it.
Well, yes, we're too romantic.
It's not even that. To be in the romantic part, I couldn't argue about side B with you. Oh, we would argue so much about side B because, first of all, half of it's me.
Half of it's what?
It's me.
Now, to give Drake some credit here, you could perceive this as resentment. However, again, Drake admitted it himself a year after this Joe Budden interview with T-Pain was published that he took immense inspiration off of T-Pain's rap singing hybrid to create his own sound. So it makes sense when he does an R&B album, it takes a lot of influence from the guy that influenced his sound to begin with. And it seems like T-Pain has the most to say about Drake when Drake is doing either R&B or just really singing on his tracks in general, right? So he did that the most on his 2022 album, Honestly Nevermind. That was a house album, strictly Drake singing, except for the last song off that project. And T-Pain got back on Akademiks' stream to actually say that he had sent Drake and Gordo, one of the main producers on that album, a couple songs to use for that house music album. And what they did was not use the song, but essentially take inspiration from it.
I sent the 2 songs for the Honestly Nevermind from Gordo. I'm talking about Gordo, a that was on the plane with him. Showed him the song. I mean, they got inspiration from the song and did another song, which is cool. I'm totally fine with that. But
they stole your shit.
They didn't steal nothing.
There you go.
You just said you heard some shit that sounded like your shit, but it wasn't your shit. That's called theft.
Everybody's doing something that somebody done did before. It ain't never gonna be different.
Again, you could say this is a backhanded statement, but facts are facts, right? If T-Pain sent over these records and Drake never got to them, and then the album comes out and they sound like T-Pain, and on top of that, you already built your entire sound off the blueprint that T-Pain built, you could see why T-Pain might feel a certain way, right? This is already the second time in T-Pain's career where he tries sending Drake a song, Drake taking a look at it, and never getting back to T-Pain. Now, it's around this same time where Drake does an interview with Lil Yachty where he details the fact that he's been kind of sitting back and contemplating the idea of gracefully bowing out of the game, taking, as he puts it, a graceful exit.
I think I'm at the point now where I just want to I feel like I'm kind of introducing the concept in my mind of a graceful exit.
Now remember those words because they're going to play an important role very shortly within this story. See, Drake would go on the next year, 2023, to release his album For All the Dogs. And right after that album, he teases the graceful exit idea again, saying that he's going to be taking a break from the studio, maybe for a year, maybe longer, he doesn't know, to deal with some health issues, some stomach issues. And at this point, he's already 14 years in the game, right? Hit after hit. And when For All the Dogs rolls around, we're already getting more than a Drake project a year, and each one getting reviewed worse than the last, each one being worse than the last, right? So it doesn't necessarily seem irrational to decide, hey, maybe let me take a step back, make the people miss me, similar to how T-Pain was thinking in the early 2010s, and at least take some time to focus on myself and focus on a higher quality of music creation. Think about the Frank Oceans, think about the Playboi Cartis. There is an art to taking a step back and not dropping music, right? Think about the iPhone. Think about the Avengers movies, right? You get a new Marvel movie every single year. You get a new iPhone every single year. With the iPhones, there's very little changes each and every year. With the Marvel movies, they kind of seem to be getting worse and worse every year because the franchise is more focused on keeping their audience fed and not letting the competition get in the way, not letting people forget who they are, that they feel like they have to be present all the time. But as a result, the quality of the work suffers. You could kind of compare that to Drake albums, right? If Drake took the Playboi Carti approach, drop an incredible album, a highly influential project, let that influence speak for itself for a few years while you take a little break and come back better than ever, your music, your legacy would reach higher levels. Gracefully exiting doesn't necessarily mean leaving the genre or leaving music forever, but instead, take a little bit of a step back in a classy way, make the people miss you, and come back with a stronger project than you've ever had. Now, of course, we know Drake did not do this, right? And that might be King Kung Fu Kenny's fault, because Kendrick Lamar drops like that as Drake is on tour. He had announced that he planned on taking a little bit of a break, but with this rap beef underway, he had to prove to the world that there may not be a big three, but it's not just a big Kendrick. Drake was still on top. He had to show that. Of course, he didn't show that. He lost that battle horribly, but I have plenty of videos on that. And essentially, Drake then in a desperate attempt to make a comeback, drops like 20 songs in 2024, oversaturating the market to prove to the world that he was not going to leave no matter how much people wanted him out. He wouldn't take no for an answer, and every big moment Kendrick Lamar had after the battle, Drake tried his best to overshadow it. Let's go in chronological order. Kendrick does the pop-out concert, uniting his whole city, bringing all these LA artists on stage. Drake, a few weeks later, drops his 100 gigs worth of songs, multiple unreleased songs, hours of unreleased footage to try and show the world, hey, remember when you loved me? Look at all these unreleased studio sessions. Like, remember how great I was when I was making Nothing Was the Same? Kendrick, in September of 2024, announces he'll be the Super Bowl halftime performer. Drake, about a week later, announces that he is dropping an album with Party Next Door around Valentine's Day, the same day as the Super Bowl. Kendrick releases GNX in November. That same week, Drake drops the bombshell lawsuit against UMG, suing them for defamation over the diss track Not Like Us. Around that same time, he also gets on a live stream with XQC, announces the Party Next Door album is on the way, and that he has an Australian tour in the same month that Kendrick will be doing the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl rolls around. A week later, we get the Drake and Party Next Door album. We're going to touch on that shortly. It plays an important role in this story, but just to show you there was even more moments of Drake trying to sabotage Kendrick Lamar's massive victory lap, he ends up canceling his Australian tour. Those 20 songs he released after the beef failed to chart. Everyone hates him for the lawsuit. The album with Party Next Door is not received very well. He leaves the Australian tour early. There's the Nokia video where he's directly copying the Not Like Us music video. And when Kendrick is about to perform in Drake's home turf of Toronto for his GNX show, Drake announces the same night of the Toronto show, he'll be doing a live stream with Kai Cenat. Mysteriously, the day of the show, his Kai Cenat live stream gets canceled, and to this day, we still don't have a rescheduling of that stream. So you could kind of see, right, what he was trying to do. He was trying to live stream as that Kendrick concert was happening to take away from the attention Kendrick was getting. It failed. All his attempts at distracting the public and making a comeback have relatively failed, and that graceful exit turned into a desperation to remain at the top. Now, I don't even know if I want to touch on the one hit Drake has had since the beef started, Nokia, because if you go back and listen to T-Pain's song Freeze and then listen to Nokia, listen to how Drake is stretching out his vocals with the auto-tune on Nokia, then go and listen to how T-Pain stretches his vocals on Freeze. It's the exact same formula. I know there was that producer Elkin who made the beat and the hook for Nokia. Drake caught flack for that. There was Drum who said that Nokia sounded mysteriously a lot like his song, and we know that Drake has already stolen Drum's Cha-Cha song for his Hotline Bling song, but even more than just that, he was stealing T-Pain's whole sauce on that Nokia record, with no credit to T-Pain, of course. Another example of him taking massive influence from Pain. In fact, that whole entire album was really an ode to not just Toronto, that moody, dark R&B sound that him and Party Next Door helped construct, but I said this in my review of that album, in that a lot of these songs really captured the feeling that T-Pain brought with his R&B records in the late 2000s. The auto-tune, the hybrid of hip-hop and R&B, the blend of it, you couldn't really tell if it was rap, if it was singing, a lot of crooning going on, the subject matter. It reminded me a lot of T-Pain. As a matter of fact, it reminded me of T-Pain and Lil Wayne, because they had that duo, he rap, he sings, and it was kind of the same thing here. Party Next Door was singing, Drake was rapping. But that album wasn't received very well, and T-Pain was not the biggest fan of it either. He essentially stated that he thought these were a bunch of throwaway songs that Drake already had, and he just told Party Next Door, like, hey, just drop a verse on these songs. Like, all you need is one verse, low effort, and we'll just call this the album. He also emphasizes he's not saying these songs are bad per se. He's just saying that they sounded like throwaways. And keep in mind, at this point, we're in 2025. T-Pain is a streamer more than he is an artist. It's his job to react to what's going on within hip-hop. This album, this is his bread and butter. This was built off the blueprint, the formula he constructed over a decade ago, right? So it's only fair that he's stating his authentic thoughts on the project.
I feel like he recorded a bunch of shit in order to keep Party around. You can take 10, 15 of these songs, put a verse on them, bitch, Party, that's our album, bro. Bro, the songs are already recorded. These are all the songs that didn't make my previous albums. Put verses on these songs. Yeah, there's 5 to 7 solo Drake songs that didn't make other albums. I'm not saying that they're bad. These are just songs that didn't make albums. Or Party came here with an album and was like, hey, Drake, can you put verses on these particular songs?
And I guess someone in his chat was like, hey, are you saying that Drake is washed with your critique on this album? And T-Pain emphasizes, like, no matter what Drake has been throughout this battle, throughout anything, he's not washed. He hasn't fallen off. His fan base is still here. Even though the music isn't what it once was, his popularity has not faded. And T-Pain here kind of sets the tone for the core issue of what he said recently that got him into a little trouble with La Brianna, because he emphasizes or implies that maybe Drake should, like Drake said years ago, contemplate a little bit of a graceful break or exit, right? He has 75 million monthly listeners. Tons of people will keep up with him no matter what. Take a vacation and come back a little more inspired after you kind of sat on your music for a little longer.
Drake is by no way washed. Not in any sense of the word. Drake is by no way washed. It's Drake, bro. This man has 75 million monthly listeners. Would it benefit him if he was just like, let them 75 million people just bask in what I got now, and I'll just probably chill out for a second? Yeah, that probably helped. 75 million people, bro, they ain't going nowhere. He literally has a chance to take a break and go on vacation.
And I think this is what we've all been thinking, right? Is this resentment, or is this T-Pain as a fan of Drake giving him honest advice on what most of the world would want to see from Drake right now? I mean, Drake is already teasing his next album. The last one with Party came out like 5 months ago, right? Like, what happened to just giving us a breather? This is like the Marvel movies of hip-hop. Put on a little mystique. Make the people miss you a little bit. Give them a story that you're able to tell once you've disappeared for so long. At this point, he has nothing to say because he's giving us an update on his life every 6 months, and his life is just filled with a bunch of superficial BS, and you could hear it in the music. And yeah, this is T-Pain saying this, but he's just going off of what Drake said in the past. Drake said, I'm thinking about taking a little bit of a break. T-Pain here is saying, yeah, these songs sound like throwaways. Maybe you should take a bit of a break for now. You're not going anywhere. The people still love you, but maybe it's time to make them miss you a bit more. Now, in that same live stream, T-Pain was talking about how he was approached by a paparazzi from TMZ, and they were asking him about this Drake album before he gave his thoughts on it. And he was like, do you ask Drake about my album when you see him? Like, why, when you think T-Pain, you think Drake? Like, why exactly are you asking me about Drake? And he says they tried to blow it out of proportion to make it seem like T-Pain was dissing Drake, when really he was just like, why, when you look at me, do you think of Drake? And at the same time, I'm a fan of Drake. And then he throws kind of a little dig at Drake, saying he's more of a fan of Party Next Door.
There was a TMZ lady out there, and she was like, T-Pain, are you hype about the new Drake album? And I said, did you ask him about my album? And she said, is that a diss? Did you just diss Drake? And I said, no, did you ask him about my album? Or when you saw T-Pain, all you can think about was Drake? They're looking for something, and I understand that. I'm a Drake fan. I'm more of a Party fan than I am a Drake fan.
So it's obvious, like, T-Pain feels like when people see him, they think Drake. Both the same lane. Drake came after him, did things on a much bigger scale, using his exact formula, right? We saw it with his comments on the Scorpion album. We saw it on his comments with the Honestly Nevermind album. But things actually get taken up a level, because remember how I mentioned before, in 2011, when Drake was on top of the world and T-Pain was trying to make his comeback with his album Revolver, he was trying to get Drake on the single. It turns out the single was his hit song 5 o'clock in the morning. It features Wiz Khalifa, but initially he was trying to get Drake on it. So T-Pain had did a podcast over 10 years later where he finally actually gives us the full story behind that. And it seems like this was the last time him and Drake worked together. But at the same time, he also said people have told him that if he was light-skinned, Drake would not exist. Because again, they always get pitted up against each other. T-Pain was Drake before Drake.
He went on the Breakfast Club and he was like, if T-Pain was light-skinned, Drake wouldn't exist.
Have you ever did a record with Drake?
I did 4 records with Drake. I wanted Drake to get on 5 o'clock in the morning, my record. I drove from Atlanta to Toronto to go get the record, and he never did it. And then after that, I went on Twitter, as per advice of my managers, which is like, everybody go tag Drake and tell him to finish that record I gave him. Then he hit my manager, was like, tell T-Pain, I know he don't really want to work with me. He gaslit me.
So it all makes sense now. Back when T-Pain in 2011 had tweeted out, hey, my album can't come out until Drake gets this verse on my next single, and then we never heard that song, that's because T-Pain went out to Toronto to record with Drake. Drake never ended up doing the song, and his manager told him, go tweet at Drake so he gets the verse out, and Drake basically gaslit him to say, oh, I guess you don't really want to work with me. But the story gets worse because Drake's most R&B sounding project, Take Care, he had actually used T-Pain vocals and his songs that he worked with T-Pain on for that project. T-Pain drives all the way to Toronto for a verse from Drake. Drake doesn't give it to him and instead uses a bunch of T-Pain records for his R&B project that, again, there'd be no R&B Drake without T-Pain.
Chilled with him for like 3 days. I did 4 records for his album. He did 0 records for mine. But I went to go get a joint for me and ended up doing 4 for him. And it was like, okay.
Did he make the album? His album?
One of them did. One of them did.
Nice.
Yeah.
Which one?
It was on the Take Care album.
Did you use your vocals or just producing?
It was my vocals. Yeah.
And this was the last time they worked together, right? Drake kind of took offense that T-Pain tweeted out, hey, Drake, come finish this song. He never finished the song. He gaslit T-Pain. And from there, there's no direct communication or connection between the two ever again. And matter of fact, aside from the sporadic project or song that was never on a major label album, we never really heard from T-Pain again, right? Again, it was Drake, Future, Travis Scott, who kind of took that lane that T-Pain had carved out in the late 2000s. And T-Pain understood what Drake didn't, in that when the game is done with you, it's time to gracefully exit and not necessarily overstay your welcome. So, in a new podcast, T-Pain was talking about how that's the greatest advice that he learned from Drake that he actually applied to his own career. When he heard Drake say, hey, I want to make them miss me. I want to step out instead of getting kicked out. T-Pain applied that to his own career and stopped trying to chase something he already accomplished. He already built a massive movement, a massive sound with autotune. He changed the game. He dropped hit after hit. He had the longevity, the legacy, the career. He didn't need to overstay and make the world realize, hey, maybe this sound is a little dated. Maybe we'd rather hear Drake on these hooks instead of T-Pain. Instead, T-Pain took a different approach, jumped into a new lane with the streaming, and decided to take a step back from music. That doesn't mean he doesn't still put out some fire. Go listen to his feature on Glorilla song, I Love Her. T-Pain is definitely still there. He's still active. But he's not chasing that major label album at this point. He's not chasing a blockbuster release, massive global hit singles. He's doing his thing. He's touring. He's streaming. He's recording on his time when he feels like it. And he says that he owes it to Drake for giving him that advice indirectly that he would later apply into the later stages of his career.
One thing I learned from Drake, but one thing he hasn't followed his own words. Drake said, I want to be one of them people that gracefully bow out and not get kicked out. I have ever since said, thank y'all. I appreciate y'all. I see y'all when I drop. Don't worry about it. I'll just drop something. Let me know if you heard it. I'm not trying to impress y'all. Y'all don't give a fuck about live or die. Yeah. I'm done. I did everything that I was trying to do. I changed the game. I made a sound. What else?
And if there's one thing about T-Pain, he doesn't hold back from the truth, and he's very comical in the way he speaks, right? He's a funny guy. So he's not necessarily speaking to spare your feelings, but he's just kind of calling it how it is. He doesn't necessarily mean it in an offensive way, but he's emphasizing that, Drake didn't really follow his own advice, right? He said you should gracefully exit before they kick you out. But now he's kind of doing the exact opposite, desperately trying to one-up Kendrick Lamar, distract the public from the L that he took, and give us this lackluster abundance of quality of mid-music to try and remind the world that he was on top at one point, that we loved him.
Yeah. Drake is like, no, listen, okay, I got another one. Oh, check this out. Y'all didn't like that one? Okay, real quick, just one more. Let me try one more. And then he's the person that he said, he didn't want to be. And I learned that from him. Like when he said that, I want to gracefully bow out and not get kicked out. I was like, you know what? I'm out this.
This is live shows now.
And I'll say this, right? When he says gracefully exit, I don't think that necessarily means Drake has to leave the game completely. I think there is a demand for the music he makes. The problem is when it seems like you're making these moves out of desperation. When you give us these throwaway songs, one after the other, that have no real effort, no real soul in them, the public, especially after the massive L you just took, after your character, everything you stood for, everything you contributed to the culture was put under a magnifying scope and into question, you gotta come with your best foot forward or take some time off to really calculate your next move properly. I do think, unlike T-Pain, there is still a demand for Drake's sound. I think with T-Pain, it was Drake himself that ran off with the blueprint that T-Pain had carved, essentially leaving T-Pain in this weird position where if he returns with his old sound, it's already kind of been updated and is now all over the charts in the form of Drake. There can only be one person doing that. So it's like when your lane has already been taken, where do you go from there? But with Drake in 2025, there's not necessarily someone in his lane, right? Like, I think the culture has more of a desire to see the type of moves Kendrick will be making, or artists similar to him, right? Who are more focused on lyricism and the messaging and the storytelling. But there is still the crowd, a massive audience nonetheless, that is here for the hits, that's here for the auto-tune, that's here for the bangers. And Drake supplies that. But what T-Pain is saying here is stop trying to win the public over. When they're trying to kick you out, don't give them even more reason to do so. Don't give them lackluster songs because you're already under a magnifying scope, right? Bring your best foot forward, and if that means taking a little bit of a break to make people miss you and to give yourself the opportunity to work on some higher quality music, then definitely do that. But of course, Drake doesn't take this as actual advice. And you can see here, this isn't out of resentment. This is T-Pain himself saying, Drake taught me this. This is something I applied to my own career. After Drake kind of took my lane, I gracefully bowed out. The same way he told the world to do the same. Now he's not following his own advice. But Drake, of course, being the petty petition padre he is, took this as hate. I'm surprised he's not suing T-Pain, but instead he commented on this clip of T-Pain talking about Drake not gracefully exiting, and he said, "This guy has always had resentment for me. You could hear it every time he speaks on my name." Now I just played you guys every time T-Pain spoke on Drake's name. Did it sound like resentment to you? It sounded like if there were actual issues between T-Pain and Drake, it stemmed from two things. One, the fact that T-Pain drove from Atlanta to Toronto to try and get Drake on this song. Drake promised him the song, but never did it. Instead, they worked on Drake's Take Care album. And then when T-Pain asked Drake for the verse, he essentially said, "Oh, what? You're going to call me out on Twitter? I guess you don't really want to work with me." And then from there, T-Pain, with the Honestly Nevermind album, sent Drake some songs. Drake, like he did with Take Care, used those songs from T-Pain for inspiration, but never gave T-Pain credit and never actually collaborated with him. The overarching theme is that there's a reason why Drake is walking out with Morgan Wallen, right? Drake attaches himself to whoever and whatever is hot at the time. If T-Pain is not on top of the world, Drake feels no need to actually credit him or collaborate with him on any music. Instead, take the influence, use it to power yourself up, take influence from his music, eat up his audience, steal his lane, and create a bigger lane for yourself. Drake's comment on this T-Pain clip, if anything, shows that Drake resents the fact that T-Pain may have done what Drake needed to do. Take a step back and focus on the things that bring you joy. T-Pain right now has a lucrative career in touring, streaming, recording music and releasing it when he feels like it on his time, and recording the music that he wants to. Meanwhile, Drake is in this dangerous spiral where he's so desperate to please everybody. He's constantly trying to focus on being the biggest rapper, the biggest pop star, the biggest hit maker, the biggest R&B singer. He's not giving his predecessors the proper credit. He hasn't given T-Pain the proper credit. And like T-Pain said when the whole ghostwriting thing happened and the mask was peeled off behind Drake, if you're very confident that you're the best, ignore the outside noise, focus on being the best, and don't let the public distract you from doing so. And I think 10 years later in 2025, T-Pain was offering the same advice. If you're not going to gracefully exit, at least follow your own advice, make the people miss you, and focus on what matters to you. Drake took that as resentment. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you in the next one.